start 2 minutes before time, before announced time.
But we hope more people will come.
And about 45 minutes after the expected time, but that's the balcony stretchable time, so I think we're used to that here. If someone wants, coffee is there, so grab it. We want to try to make this session as relaxed as possible. So welcome to the cybersecurity session. Now it's at the start, something is wrong having one cybersecurity session because there's so many topics to cover within a session. That's why we have 3-hour session today. So we have a lot of time to discuss and try to map various aspects of cybersecurity. Tatiana, maybe starting with a bit of introduction. What do we want with this session? How did we come with such a broad idea? And then I can say how we are going to handle it.
Thank you, Vlada. My name is Tatiana Tropina. A bit of history about this session. You know that EuroDIG has bottom-up approach. So when we were appointed as two focal points for this cybersecurity session, and we had to have a look at the proposals submitted, and it was almost incredible because we've got proposals like drones, like child safety, like roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders in cybersecurity, which looked a bit unmatching in the beginning. Because before EuroDIG, cybersecurity sessions always had one main overarching theme, like, let's say, public-private partnerships or rule of law and criminal justice. And then we looked at these proposals and realized, no, we don't want to pick only one of them. They're all aspects of cybersecurity, and let's just bring them together like a puzzle. And that's why we have speakers for like working in different domains in national security and cybercrime and critical resources. Shall I introduce the panel, Vlada? Would you like to? So from left to right, there is Michael Yakushev from the ICANN, Vice President for Eastern Europe, right, and stakeholder engagement. Then Jeffrey DeMarco from Middlesex University. Then Marina Kaljurand from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Estonia. Then York from Internet Society, Senior Content Strategist. And Alexander Zeger from Council of Europe, Head of Cybercrime Division. But
I'm astonished that you managed to memorize all the positions.
Actually, I wrote them down, but yeah, somehow I memorized them because I know almost all the speakers. So, but before we turn to the panel, because we want this session to be interactive, so our idea was that not only we are kind of clustering issues into internet security, into child protection, into national security, we want you to share with us your concerns. What would you like to talk about? What do you think is a cybersecurity topic that is very problematic now, that is very current, and you want it to be brought here to the session? So you, audience, would be also shaping this. So if someone wants to speak, we can just give the microphone.
The idea is to pick up firstly the issues, the challenges that we see that we need to discuss, and then we'll go through the reflections and then maybe even to groups. Introduce yourself, please.
Okay, so good day, everybody. I'm Oleg Demidov from Russia, from Moscow-based non-governmental think tank PIR Center. Some of you know it, some others not. And well, if I just had an opportunity to make a comment on the agenda of today's session, it's typical for Russia to talk on peace and security agenda when it comes to cybersecurity, and though I'm not a governmental representative or an official, I would like to cover that part of our broad puzzle, because, well, I was attending the Global Conference on Cyberspace in The Hague just in April, and it was very much notable that the issues of norms for cyberspace and the issues of global cyber governance came to the forefront of the agenda quite unexpectedly, and there was even very clear trend towards promotion of the activities of the United Nations United Nations governmental experts group within the framework of the GCCS. So there's something different from it used to be before. Now clearly the issue of consensus on norms for states' responsible behavior in cyberspace are at the very focus, at the forefront of the agenda. And I do know that this issue is something unconventional for the EuroDIG agenda, because EuroDIG it's more about, you know, content regulation, cybercrime, but not on this peace and security and strategic stability in cyberspace agenda. Though it's my question to you, whether should we try to engage this peace and security topic for cyberspace into the scope of our session, or should we not? And if we are still gonna do it, then I'm going to finish with another question in that regard, is what actually might be the most promising ways and strategies to move towards consensus on norms? What issue, what field, what niche might be the appropriate one for creating some trust anchor, for creating the point of consensus for nation states in terms of elaboration of norms for cyberspace? Should it be critical infrastructure like NPPs and so on? Should it be just the issues of application of international humanitarian law to cyberspace? Should it be something different, like as it was proposed in The Hague, granting the status of the global common to the internet's global infrastructure and building norms around that? I don't know, and it's my question to you. Thank you, and sorry for taking too much of your time.
Thank you, Oleg. And actually, I forgot to mention in my introduction that we announced collection of issues on Twitter, and of course, few people tweeted. So the issues I picked up from Twitter, they are also very diverse. Like thin line between freedom of speech and cybersecurity, so human rights issue, cryptocurrencies, the issue of regulation, cyberbullying, the issue of protection from human harms and using networks to harm humans, so safety of the users and of the society. Models of self and co-regulation. So you can see how diverse the issues are. And if you want to add something more, anyone? One moment, I will handle you the microphone. You would be the next.
Louise Bennett, BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. The issue that I would like to add is the security or lack of security of payments over the internet from mobile devices.
Thank you. Katrin Morasch from InSafe Network, and I was also participant at the New Media Summer School, and we already had a session with Tatiana. It was pretty cool, and we were also talking about the line between cybercrime and cybersecurity, and that we have to have transparency about that. And then it led in the discussion to public-private partnerships, how we can involve the stakeholders to participate, and what we have to do to kind of satisfy the people that they're not afraid of what is happening actually.
Thank you. Marco? Let the gentleman over there, and then we'll get back to you.
Thank you. I am Jon Thorhalsson. I'm the president of SICU, and actually I come from Iceland. We are very fortunate here today to have here a representative, high-level representative from Estonia, because Estonia is one of the countries which has faced an attack on the government institutions, and they survived it, of course. And I think this is very important. Similar attacks have taken place, but probably the Estonian one is the most prominent one. And this morning, what you described was sort of, the way I see it, more or less a vision for the future. You described all the ongoing processes, etc., etc. So I have a very practical question. It will take some time until this vision becomes true. How do you suggest we bridge the gap from where we are now until the vision has come true? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Marco?
Yeah, agree with some of what previous speakers says. In my field of work, by the way, Marco Hoogwoning, RIPE NCC, and I do a lot of engagement with law enforcement at the moment. Is what I observe, in my personal opinion, is it's somewhat a bit of a NIMBY, not in my backyard, because on one end everybody is pushing for more, what they say, security, more privacy, which means strong encryption. up to the point where you become a victim of a certain crime, because then you want that person to be behind jail. And we should take into consideration that no matter how secure we build our systems and how far we protect our privacy, at some point we also need to be able to find those culprits and get them behind bars. The second point, I think, and that's also in EuroDIG in light of the multi-stakeholder thing, I think everybody should also be aware of their own responsibilities, because I see a lot of cases where people basically do a bad job and then hide behind "I'm being attacked," while actually to some extent you can say like, well, it's your own fault. You were running a lot of old systems and you weren't keeping up to date with today's technology. We have to be aware this is a continuous rat race. Whenever you find a bigger lock, somebody else will bring a bigger hammer to it. And that's something to keep in mind in the whole discussion.
Thanks, Marco. Tanya is trying to write down the key
Yes,
issues, so we'll
I'm
get back to them.
trying to write down.
Over there.
Maya Koleva, Sofia University. My proposal for a kind of a under topic within the cybersecurity debate is very much in line with what some of the previous speakers already mentioned. My question is electronic identity going to enhance cybersecurity, or is it going to strike too much of a negative balance in in other domains, such as right to privacy? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vyacheslav Tarasevich. I'm from the Russian Embassy in Sofia. So let me please underline our official position of issues of international security and cybersecurity. So these questions, as well as management of the internet, are regarded as a priority in the Russian Federation. The drawing up of the universal rules of the responsible conduct of the states in the international space, based on the principles of respect towards state sovereignty, non-intervention in the other countries' internal affairs, fundamental human rights and freedoms, as well as equal rights for all countries to the internet governance. The internet governance is a great significance for Russia. Our position of problems in the aspiration for providing of the internalization of the internet governments, as well as the increasing of the state role in this process. So dear panelists, dear guests, how you comment on the following ideas. First, the increasing of the state's participation in the process of the internet governments. The second, increasing of the coordination level of international, regional and national efforts in the internet governments. And the third one, what is your opinion of the ideas that the United Nations or one of its structures could take under control the internet governments and internal information security and cybersecurity? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We'll probably narrow it down a little bit to security, but
I narrowed down in my
sure,
in my points.
I have a very simple yet complex question. Have you ever heard of the Blackstone formulation?
Can you elaborate, if you wish, or you want?
In
to throw
criminal law, there's this principle that it's better to let 10 guilty people go unpunished than punish one innocent.
Okay.
Oh well.
So we're looking in the prism of cybersecurity. Any other inputs at the beginning?
Cybercrime.
Yes.
Balance enforcement.
We have here another one.
Thank you very much. My name is Bisera Zankova. I'm a media expert from Bulgaria. I would like to pose such a question for this very, very interesting panel. It is about the implementation of norms. So it's not sufficient to have international consensus and to elaborate standards at an international level. It's very important to assure the implementation of these norms, and more particularly to assure their implementation at the national level through appropriate procedures and rules, having in mind the principles that are incorporated in the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other question or point to be raised? Or we are fine for the moment? Okay, I think we have quite a set of good questions. Aha, Yanis.
Oh.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Like
Thank you very much,
12.
Janis Karpinch. I have a very simple question. Is there any tipping point how much we are ready to invest in cybersecurity that it becomes unreasonable?
Invest in terms of...
in terms of ensuring that our actions are secure.
Politically, okay.
Because my point is, or my thought is, that all this is perception. And the moment when perceived disadvantage of use of technology will start outweigh the perceived advantage, people or organizations or companies will start disengage. We have heard already on one instance that there was decision to disengage after Snowden revelations. So is there any tipping point? And if there is, how high that bar is?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. One more
is there
issue?
another one? Sure.
Hello, my name is Simeon Derev from Ubisoft. I want to address one issue, what I find really bad. The new softwares which are developed really frequently are untested, and there are big risk for exploiting them. I wanted to address that there is a need to be tested more before they publish it.
So you mean security by design, or tests for security, or
design? Okay.
Security by
so
design.
in a way, how do you assure that that is tested? That's kind of a question, right?
So
well,
security by design.
They're frequently developed and published, and more of them they're not really tested.
Yeah.
It's like so many updates that they've trying to fix the problems. That's one of the issues.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Any other final point at this moment, or we can move on? So Tanya took notes. The good thing is that among the panelists we actually have kind of coverage of international peace and security, cybercrime, technical aspects, critical resources, and how do you call it, human...
protection of vulnerable targets in the digital age. Right. I would call it, if we expand this, to protection from human harm.
So the idea is to try to cluster these questions within these broad clusters and try to maybe focus a little bit in the next part. Do you want to run through the questions?
Yes. Yes.
Briefly
So
again.
I will run through the questions before we handle to the panel, and I will give you the word for introducing what we would like to panelists to share. So consensus on norms in cyberspace, consensus issues in peace and national security, payment security, the line between cybersecurity and cybercrime, public-private partnership models of regulation. Security versus crime, security of users versus enforcement. One moment. Privacy versus law enforcement. Increasing of the state role in the internet governance on the basis of security issues. Coordinating internet governance on the international level in terms of intergovernmental approach, balance for enforcement, law enforcement, and cybersecurity, implementation of frameworks, how do we observe it, human rights issues, which I believe should be cross-cutting, costs and investments, and security of software development, maybe security by design. So how do we ensure this from technical point of view and from industry point of view, from vendors point of view and developers. So these are the issues, and I handle the floor to you to
pass the microphone to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
great.
you have to say what we are going to achieve.
So let's try to go through these kind of five thematic clusters, and I think we might start actually with Marina, since there was a lot of questions about international peace and security, and you're a member of the governmental group of experts as well. You may reflect, but what ultimately we maybe want to hear at the end is 1, 2, 3 points. What are the open questions that we might further discuss here today? Kind of a wrap up. But you might also reflect with on current set of questions briefly.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the questions. And well, I'm absolutely sincere when I say that I'm honored and privileged to be here with the other panelists. And at the same time, I have to say that there are so many questions that really I do care about. You are free to leave, because I'll be talking now for an hour and a half. So join us during the second session. But I'll try to be as precise as possible with the questions raised. Thank you very much for raising the question of applicability of international. I will skip my introductory remarks.
Sure.
That I have. I'll go directly to the questions, because you can read the introductory remarks in our talking points. Applicability of international law, extremely, extremely important. I'm representing Estonia at the UNGG, UN group of governmental experts on cybersecurity, as we call ourselves. And we're working at the moment. In June, we have the 4th session, and we're supposed to present a report to UNGA this autumn. And we are working on the assumption to what all states agreed in 2013. International law applies to cyberspace. Dot. Now we're arguing, or now we're discussing how. And I'll be very open. We have 2 different approaches. One approach is that let's look into the norms that exist today. Let's try to apply them. And then if something's missing, let's see what else should we add. Another approach, forget about international law that is more than UN Charter, and let's start writing new convention. Why do we oppose that? I'm a lawyer. I've been in the United Nations for more than 20 years in different working groups. To start writing a new convention on such a difficult subject, it's 50, 60, 70 years. And still we will be stuck with the first para definitions. Because we shouldn't expect that with the GG we will solve the questions of pre-cyber era, jurisdiction, sovereignty, aggression, and so on and so on and so on. So let's do what we can. Our position at the GG is very pragmatic. Somebody mentioned 2007. Yes, it was a wake-up call to us and to wider society. What we learned from there, that is what we are bringing to international arena. In our proposals, we try to be very pragmatic. We're not proposing just because of proposals. At the same time, kind of ambitious and learning from our experience. Somebody in the audience mentioned, could one of the new norms be protection of critical infra? That's our proposal. We see that one of the principles where countries might agree as a new norm of responsible state behavior, political norm, not legally binding legal norm, but political voluntary norm, that states might agree to protect and not to attack critical infra. When I say that, we have hundreds of questions, because states are free to define their critical infra. Yes, we have guidelines how to do that. Some states do it publicly, others do it confidentially. That's why we elaborate. Our proposal is to agree not to attack critical infra in financial sector. Not only banks, but financial sector. Because that's the backbone of economy. And we think that there's something where we can agree, and some delegations are supporting us. Another principle where we think we can agree in the GG, in the United Nations, better cooperation of CERTs. Our initial thought was to agree that states don't interfere into the work of CERTs when CERTs are working on the resolution of incidents. That's too much. Okay, let's step back. Let's see, maybe we can agree that better cooperation of CERTs is needed. And these are very elementary proposals of responsible state behavior that we have tabled. Some other countries have tabled their proposals. So we have 1 week to go for the GG. I very much hope today that we will come out with a report, although I'm not sure. Because we are still arguing about application of international law. For example, we're arguing about humanitarian law, whether it applies in armed conflict. Because how can you imagine that in today's world, if you have an armed conflict, then you start separating. This is traditional kinetic war, but this part is cyber. Here we apply law of armed conflicts, but this part is escaped from that. We not apply to that part. We are arguing about that. We are arguing about human rights. Should it be universal, or should states introduce, I say, fake cultural, historical, and so other exceptions to limit human rights in internet freedom? We are still arguing if application of international law is our everyday normal. It's not application of international law when somebody violates something and he's sued or taken to court. No. Even the pure fact that today we do not have armed conflicts or aggressions by ICT means is application of international law. We follow the UN Charter and so on and so on and so on. Do I still have a couple of minutes? Or you want me to finish?
Yeah.
To finish or a couple of minutes?
Yeah, a couple of
Yeah, a
minutes.
couple of minutes, please.
Another tweet.
Public-private partnership. I think that in that sense, my country is in a unique position. The attacks of 2007 were pretty primitive. They were not against government, but they were also against private banking and so on. They didn't destroy anything. They destructed for some time our everyday life. Those were DDoS attacks, so they were not. And what happened the next morning, even a couple of weeks before the attacks, was that private sector came to work for government free. Bankers, the ICT geeks, whom government can never afford because they're so expensive, they came to work for government free. So it is our cyber defense league. And since then, we have an extremely good partnership with those guys. Unfortunately, they are guys. Unfortunately, there are not too many women among them. And that's another topic that worries me. But they see what they can offer to government. They're participating in the same exercises. Of course, they have all security clearances. They are on the same page with government. They're exchanging information. And that's something that where we're different from majority of countries. If in majority of countries one bank is attacked, it's a top secret. The bank doesn't share it. In our case, first bank attacked, immediately shares information in the network, and they are united in protecting. And another hour and a half, we can talk in the corridor, because I have a lot to say, so maybe at a later stage I can continue. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Actually, yeah, some organizational issues. I believe that we started with you, with the audience, and we will accept very short statements or questions with regard to what panelists said. But I believe just organizational issue that the next floor we will give to Michael, because he would be departing a bit earlier. So just after this, no, just the first, if anyone in the audience has short questions, statements, because we will move to this after. But yeah, anyone, anything to say, anything to ask, anything to add to what has been said.
We'll build up also later on. But
oh well, but you have 1.5 hours to follow. No, I'm not trying to prevent you. Please take a microphone and shoot.
Trying to find the second microphone.
Oh.
I'll take this one.
We found it.
Locate. It's over there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It was very informative and very insightful. And just as a follow-up to your speech, I have one comment and probably one question. So the comment is, well, in a positive way, I'm a bit surprised to hear from you that the group of governmental experts, as far as I understood it from you, is quite close to agree on the need to follow the norm, the informal political norm, to not intervene into critical infrastructure of the financial sector. Because I do know that this initiative was promoted and probably, I don't know, was formulated by Russian former chair of the group of governmental experts.
Who is no member of the group.
Yeah, so it's quite surprising to see that Estonia and Russia agree on that, on a critical issue in cyberspace. No, people just make a notice of that. That's not the usual case. Really, I do like it. So This is the comment. Now the question is, well, it's very interesting to track the evolution of the general attitude towards the activities of the group of governmental experts. Because I do know that during the two first sessions of the group in the first half of the previous decade, it was many times opposed and criticized by people who were trying to picture it like a format aimed to promote Russian viewpoint and so on. Now it's different. As I told it at the GCCS, it was very much promoted and supported by almost each speaker, so it's great. But one question I have, so does the format itself plans to change to have more feedback from non-governmental experts? Because as far as we see, this is something important, and that might contribute significantly to the activities and to the outputs of the group of governmental experts. Just a practical case, I've been engaged into a research project related to global internet infrastructure. And we have very particular, very concrete conclusions and ideas that there is an issue of protection and ensuring stability and security of the Internet's global infrastructure, like the Internet's unique identifier system. And that might be as well another good point, good starting point for states to talk on non-intervention norms for many reasons. Because each state is critically dependent on that infrastructure, because each state is a beneficiary of its stable and secure operation. And there are a number of reasons. I would be able to talk to you in a corridor about that. But how could we make an input as non-governmental experts to the UN-GG format? That's an important issue.
Let me build up on that with adding also European perspective. When you're talking about the norms, we have an example of OSCE confidence building measures, which are very, very like what you mentioned over there on cooperation between CERTs, avoiding attacking critical infrastructure and so on. And the OSCE has the first set of which is developed, and the OSCE also has occasional meetings where the non-government representatives are present. To what extent this European perspective can be incorporated and useful maybe to the GG? So just building up on this.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. First of all, it's a stereotype. We don't look at the proposals, whether they're Russian or German or Pakistani. We look at the essence of the proposal. And trust me, I was ambassador of Estonia to Russia from 2005 to 2008, so I was in Moscow during the cyber attacks, and I was cooperating with Russian officials during the cyber attack. They were not cooperating with me, but I was cooperating at least with them. Now let's come to the question of how close we are to the report. Norms section, most difficult. I think that we are very close to some wordings concerning confidence building measures, capacity building, cooperative measures, and general remarks on new threats. We're pretty close there. International law, much more difficult. New norms, much more difficult. But I think that we'll be able to introduce some new norms of responsible state behavior. And I'll make a distinction. I'm a lawyer, yeah? So I'll make a distinction. When we talk about new norms, I'm talking about political new norms that are not binding, that are, as a matter of fact, the same as confidence-building measures. OSCE, extremely important. And we try to take on board as many OSCE CBMs as have been agreed, but it's geographical representation. And we have to be very careful so that we won't become again a club of rich white countries that dominate the others. We have to listen very carefully what the other regions are going to say, and we have to be very sensitive when we talk about OSCE. And that's why we're also looking, for example, into the code of conduct, which is proposed by Russia, China, and some other countries, and so on. Private sector, civil society, and GG, I'm sorry to say, but I don't see a specific role there. And please let me elaborate. It's a group of governmental experts. When we go back home, we consult. And we look and we talk to private sector. I was very pleased to, for example, to read the new norms that were proposed by Microsoft. I don't agree to all of them, but some of them are pretty good. As to geographical representation, Estonia is the only Nordic Baltic country in the GG. That's why we're briefing our region. When Nordic Baltic, it's Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Iceland. Who did I forget? Denmark. So we're working together. When I go to GG, I don't represent them, but I know their views and I brief them. Same with private sector. And again, Estonia is a small country. We really do have limited resources, and we can't be good at the GG or any other forums without the help of academia. Very close cooperation with civil societies, academia. So before going there, consulting to them, consulting with them. When prepare Estonian position papers, we were talking to banks. We didn't think it from our head, because we are representing there the whole society. So we take the questions on board. How other countries are doing, that's up to them to describe. What I said in the keynote is that we need other platforms. GG is one thing, government talking about norms. We need other platforms that are inclusive. In what way? EuroDIG is one of them. There are other forums of discussing, and we need something where governments, academia, private sector comes together. We feel it more and more and more. Because again, coming from Estonia, we're criticized that we are a rich country that is imposing norms. Or for those of you who are familiar with the Center of Excellence in Tallinn, Cybersecurity Center of Excellence in Tallinn, they have published Tallinn Manual, which is again described as a book of norms written by white military. Okay, maybe that's not 100% true, but that's true, that it hasn't taken into account views and proposals of other geographical regions.
Thank you very much. And I am sorry that we are not able to accept more questions and statements, because Michael Yakushev would be leaving soon, so I would handle the floor to you. I don't know what kind of sequence you had in mind.
No, that's absolutely perfect, because he already touched upon the identifiers and the critical resources, so that's just a perfect, as if we coordinated.
Thank you. I'm very thankful for everyone who has already made some statements. I'm thankful for Oleg, and I'm also very thankful for Marina. You had said one thing that I like and one thing that I dislike. So I will start with the thing that I dislike. We are the witnesses of a new term, which is unilateral cooperation, which is not good. And this is exactly what I don't like. The cooperation should be always multilateral. Otherwise, it's not a cooperation. You said that you cooperated with someone, but they did not cooperate with you. This is exactly the unilateral cooperation.
But then that's not a content. This is just factual, you know.
Okay, so I represent the organization that is responsible for stability, security, and resiliency of the global internet infrastructure. And in our opinion, and according to our charter documents, the system of global identifiers, unique global identifiers like autonomous systems, like IP addresses and domain names, it's exactly what we can call, accepted by everyone, the global infrastructure of the internet. And of course, the security, stability issues are very important. And ICANN works on the principle of multi-stakeholders approach. And of course, we are now more than 3 or 4 billion internet users in the world, in the planet Earth. And of course, without multi-stakeholders approach, we could not find any solutions to the problems that appear in different jurisdictions, in different types of businesses, etc., etc. And that is why it's very important for us to work together. And what I liked from Marina's intervention is the way how the intergovernment group works, just asking assistance, asking consultants, expertise from the local stakeholders. And this shows how it should work when we're talking about the role of the governments. The governments should represent the interests of the local communities, local stakeholders, and thus it will work. Otherwise, the voices of such governments will not be heard and will not be respected. And going to the essence of what we are talking now, there are different types how to protect the security and how to deal with the cybersecurity. One of these methods is technical. Just use the software and different applications that would protect your connections, your internet resources, your network, etc., etc. Another method is legal. We should unanimously understand what is illegal, how the guilty people should be punished, etc. And also there is what we call in Russia organizational methods, which include, for example, education. Without education, it will be very hard to talk about cybersecurity in the next 15 to 20 years, because the new generation, which were born with iPads and iPods, then they may have totally different opinion how the cybersecurity and the internet should work. And it's not only education of people, of small children, of pupils, it's education of the adults and the education of the teachers. So the teachers, sometimes they have less knowledge about cybersecurity than the people from their classes, from their schools, who just know quite well how to use certain resources and how to gain access to the resources that are banned by their governments, and thus increasing the risks of cybercrime. And it requires our common efforts and our commonly accepted approaches. So the immediate way out to find a compromise is to look for the possible compromises in specific spheres without over-politicizing the issues, but making it important for everyone. Just adaptation or development of international legal instruments, it's one of these ideas, and it can be and should be supported by everyone. To share best practices in terms of education, it's another solution. To distribute information about best working technical software tools to protect cybersecurity, it's also could be an option, but our business companies, they will do it themselves because they're interested in just selling these software tools. And there is an area where we can achieve, again, a compromise, and it will be a very good practical result, is to agree on the identification issues. It will heavily contribute to the solution of the issues like cybercrime, cyber attacks, the attribution of the violator. And we have very good examples, again, in the countries like Estonia, in the countries like the American concept, strategy on the cybersecurity. We have good examples in other regions that should be shared and should be finally adopted, because otherwise we will continue talking about the impossibility of attribution of cyber criminals, and nothing will change until we accept the possibility to locate the cyber criminal with the help of the global system of identification, which should, of course, should not harm the human rights of the internet users. So very briefly, let's look for the areas for such consensus, and let's develop solutions for these areas. Next steps will be to do something more, but it will be done after we found consensus and we will work together on these specific areas.
Before I handle to the audience, I have one question to a panelist, the moderator. You are vice president of the ICANN. Do you have any specific, because you are leaving, you know, and in the second part of the session at the follow-up, we'll be discussing problems of collaborative approaches. You're talking right now about collaboration, about working together and so on. Tell us, from your practical experience, what is your main problem of collaboration on your position? If you can express it, if it's not classified, if it's not something that you should, you know, hold secret or something like this. Well, in your opinion, from your personal experience in cybersecurity issues, what is your main problem?
It is a digital divide.
It
may seem very strange, but it is exactly like this, because we have countries, even in my region of the former Soviet Union, where there are experts, there is an interest of the governments to solve certain issues, but in other countries there is no such interest, no such type of experts, and that's why there is a lot of issues on the local level. And I always try to engage people to participate in such kind of discussions, just to distribute important information, because internet makes our world global. And if this divide exists, then the countries and the users outside the more developed part of this divide will suffer more than ourselves. So I think the biggest issue by now is this divide.
So is it kind of technical divide or more capacity and awareness divide, or both?
Maybe it's both, but mostly, of course, because of the capacity.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Because of that, then there are technical issues as well.
There is another thing that resonated when you mentioned before on cooperation, is that we need to kind of depoliticize the cooperation. Is it possible? Can we really do it? I mean, otherwise we probably wouldn't be sitting here in such a diversity.
We are living in a real world where there are governments, different political views of different governments. So if we're talking about the governmental level of cooperation, then it will be very difficult to avoid this politicization. Yes, but maybe we should not over-politicize the situation. Mm-hmm. But we have also another levels of cooperation, and that's why I always stress the importance of multi-stakeholders approach. And on the level of businesses, on the level of civil society, experts, then there is no need to just engage politics, because we're talking about technical issues, we're talking about security of the internet users, but the internet user has human rights irrespective where he lives and what kind of political situation is in his country. So that's why let's leave the political issues on the level of the intergovernmental interaction, but we as an experts, we as businesses, as civil society, should not over-politicize these very specific and practical issues.
Any questions from the audience regarding to what Michael told? We will have ICANN representative on the next session on the follow-up, but if you want to ask something like concerning what Michael was talking about, or just shoot a short statement, yeah, you will be welcome. Otherwise, we can leave everything for the follow-up, and yeah, if there would be no hands, because I don't see any hands.
Should we move on the... So the question on depolitization is also relevant to talking about the norms in relation to cooperation among the CERTs, but it's also law enforcement when it comes to cybercrime. So throwing that question basically to Alex now on the cybercrime angle of this discussion, to what extent politics prevents the cooperation when it comes to cybercrime combating? Not just throwing it in the air, but
no, because you're free to talk about any
Absolutely.
problems you experience in your field. So just
can you put the first one on it, because I would like to come back to some of the
yeah,
questions that were raised by people. There was the issue of the outcome from the Hague, or from the Hague conference, and so on. I would like to recall that the London process, as it is also called, when William Hague in 2011, the UK foreign minister, convened that first meeting, the purpose was exactly that, to deal with norms of behavior, to develop such norms of behavior for state-to-state relations. Okay? That was the rationale from the beginning, and it's very good to see the progress made after many years, actually, at the UN level with a group of governmental experts. The confidence-building measures that are being, first set that been negotiated, another one that is being negotiated at the level of the OSCE. This is very important. I think what the conference in London, in Budapest, in Seoul, and in The Hague now also underlined, it is completely unfeasible to develop a one-in-all approach. To have one international treaty that deals with everything from cybersecurity to cybercrime to terrorist use of the internet to cyber warfare and everything else. That's completely unrealistic. Anybody proposing that basically doesn't want the solution, let's face it. Yeah. What also came out of these different conferences, and I think that's very reasonable, is that although everything is interconnected, we have to see what are areas where we can have consensus, where we can make progress. Are there manageable portions that we can take out? And when it comes to the issue of cybercrime, it's clear that there is already a solution that many countries have subscribed to. That's the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. maybe we can take that one out, deal with that one in one way, and then focus on state-to-state relations in other fora, like the governmental group of experts. That is a bit the rationale that many governments and many countries are following. One question was, what is the line then between cybercrime and cybersecurity?
National security, rather. Well, or cybersecurity, but you can elaborate on
The question
this.
was cybersecurity versus versus cybercrime.
Yeah.
There are commonalities and there are also areas. It's not the same, basically. Cybersecurity is dealing primarily with protecting information systems, computer systems, reliance, and many other things. That includes also protecting against intentional attacks by states, by criminals, by individuals, whoever. That is also the area that is covered by cybercrime. Intentional attacks against computer, attacks against, as it is called in the Budapest Convention, attacks against the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of computer systems and data. That's the common area of cybercrime and cybersecurity. Cybercrime will deal with many other areas, with many other fields. Fraud, in many ways, it's not a cybersecurity issue, but it's a cybercrime issue. Child abuse is not necessarily a cybersecurity issue, but it's a cybercrime issue. The issue of electronic evidence and access to such evidence is a criminal justice issue. Maybe a cybercrime issue, but it's definitely a criminal justice issue, and we have to deal with that. So if you look at it that way, cybercrime is more narrow but also broader than cybersecurity and vice versa. If we talk about the cybercrime issue and if we talk about skills and capacities, we also realize that this broad perspectives, cybercrime and electronic evidence, brings tremendous challenges, namely that every single police officer, every single prosecutor, every single judge, sooner or later will come across a case of electronic evidence. They all need to have the skills, they all need to be trained, and so forth. On the balance between how many cases do we investigate and what is a reasonable balance in there, in my opinion, the share of cases actually investigated is so small that you cannot even measure it. So we're not talking about a situation where there's an overkill in investigations. What we have is a situation where if you're a victim of crime in cyberspace, the chance that justice will be served is almost zero. There is no expectation of justice. We are organizing next week in Strasbourg an Octopus conference on cybercrime. It's quite a big event again. And we included for the first time a workshop in it called Victims of Cybercrime. Does anybody care? Because when we talk about human rights and cybercrime and cybersecurity, everybody talks about government interfering. Of course, mass surveillance is a serious threat to human rights. And we clearly need better surveillance of surveillance agencies. We need better control of national security institutions. That is absolutely clear. And as a footnote to that, I don't believe personally that it's compatible with the European Convention of Human Rights that you protect your own citizens, and your own citizens have rights if they are surveyed or if there is interceptions, but you don't give the same protection to the data of foreign subjects that you are intercepting. I think we have a big issue there that has to be resolved. Okay? With regard to the cybercrime issue, I believe we need more effective, more tools for criminal justice authorities. We need more resources for criminal justice authorities. We need more effective tools for mutual legal assistance. And it's a very complicated one. And here we talk about also, we see also a divide between the technical perspective and the criminal justice perspective. I talked to some industry representatives, so it's easy. We write you a program of how you can execute automatically mutual legal assistance requests. That means they have no understanding of how the system works. It's not enough that the competent central authority somewhere has some software and some training to execute a request. All of these requests are executed locally. You have local judges, local prosecutors, local police officers. You need to equip them all. And you also have to take the language problem into account. So even if the central authorities understand English, it's defined by law normally that locally it has to be presented in the local language and so on. So there are tremendous problems, and I see still a huge digital divide between the criminal justice community and the cybercrime, cybersecurity community. Another issue that we need to address is the issue of territoriality and jurisdiction. In the context of cloud computing, where is the data? There are layers of jurisdiction involved there, because it's not just one cloud service providers with one service. There are sub-services. The data is coming and going in all directions. To whom do you send a mutual legal assistance request? In the Council of Europe, the Cybercrime Convention Committee, which is the committee of the parties to the Budapest Convention, established last December something called the Cloud Evidence Group to look into solutions for that. But the first thing they did is they listed the challenges. And a summary of the paper on law enforcement access to cloud data, the challenges was made public a few days ago. It will also be discussed next week, and I think
I will link it to the session page. I think if I already have not, maybe I have. It was these days have been a bit hectic,
yeah.
But anyway. So anything which have been referred to at this session, you will find the papers, the documents. If speakers want to share the speaking points or anything, we will put everything online, so you will be able to access it.
So this paper is out, and it lists only the questions for the moment. I hope you can all help us to find answers to those. If you find answers to that, we can possibly also then find a better way to address the issue of criminal justice in cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone has questions? Because, yeah, exactly, because we started, but very short ones, because we will have follow-up sessions. So if there is any question requiring long answer and elaboration, please, let's leave it to the follow-up.
Yeah, actually my question is, what
please
do you
introduce yourself.
Oh yeah, I already did before when I had the first question. My name is Katrin. I'm a youth ambassador at InSafe Network and took part at New Media Summer School. And my question is, what do you think about, like, when it comes to national security, if like cybercrime is part of national security? Because like when it comes, for example, to data retention, it's like hurting the privacy of the people. But like the politicians constantly saying that it is needed for prevent some crimes, but they say it's needed for national security, but I think it's still a crime. So
let's pick up a couple of questions and then we get back. I'll give it to the lady and back to you.
And there is also a man on this side, so
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Xian Honghu from UNESCO. Yesterday, Yesterday, I presented a UNESCO Internet study in another session. I mentioned one sub-area about the protection of journalism sources in digital age. I didn't elaborate yesterday because it's more related to the cybersecurity. According to our new research, we have found we have surveyed 120 countries the legal protection of journalism sources in digital age. We found actually they are really challenged and undercut by the current national security law and mass surveillance and also targeted surveillance. So this would be a threat for journalism to continue to play a role of watchdog in the digital age. I wonder if you agree to this observation and what reaction, what protection, what measure can be taken to improve this.
Thank you. Marco.
Yeah, following up, Alexander. You got me scared there for a bit when you said like, oh yeah, child abuse is cybercrime, and I think we have to, and I would encourage and love to respond, have the panel respond on that. Is can we untangle what really is cybercrime, i.e. people breaking into digital systems, stealing digital information that is of value, and the fact that the internet being a common infrastructure that's used for everything, including all sorts of crime. It's in the end, and that's also linking to cybersecurity and surveillance, because the tendency is like everything is cybercrime, and right now we're opening basically every car that's on the highway and look into the trunk because there might be something illegal, and we should, if we can narrow it down to people just driving over the highway to those really driving over the highway with the intent to perform a criminal act, we might get somewhere in both in the cybercrime discussion and as well as into protecting privacy and cybersecurity.
Thank you, Marco. One more here. We are entering the field of definitions, which is going to.
Matei Vasile from APTI. What I want to say is kind of related to what he just said. So if there's such a low proportion of investigated so-called cybercrime, how about us, all of us, thinking about kind of clarifying exactly what cybercrime and what isn't? Maybe we have an extremely broad definition of what cybercrime is. I mean, nowadays even trolling, some people say it's cybercrime, which is ridiculous. And another stuff like that, which is, for example, the child pornography thing. That's not a cybercrime, that's crime, which sometimes happens on the internet, but it's not inherently a cybercrime. The only internet-related part of it is at least trying to identify the perpetrator and then going in the physical world and arresting them. You don't need blocking and cybercrime initiatives for it. It's that simple.
Oh, you have full plate of thoughts and questions.
No, it's easy. It's all easy. It's no problem at all. Let's keep in mind that on the issue of national security versus criminal justice. Criminal justice functions under a very specific set of rules. And those rules include also rule of law safeguards. And they have been established by European Court of Human Rights, they've been established by international human rights law. And let's face it, most governments around the world, in my opinion, would still follow them. And I've talked in IGF some years ago. I was on a panel with a blogger from Egypt who says, "You're absolutely right. Under criminal justice, the government cannot do anything against me. They just move me into the national security arena, and that's how I find myself in prison and tortured." Okay? So for the criminal justice side, we have clear rules, and they can be followed. They are manageable. We have to resolve some issues regarding territorial jurisdiction issues and what rules apply and so on, but in principle, it's possible. With regard to national security, big question marks. When it comes to data retention, I don't want to, because if you want to kill a discussion, you just discuss, you know, if you talk about human trafficking, you just have to discuss about legalizing prostitution, and the discussion is dead. And if you talk about cybercrime, cybersecurity, you just start with data retention, and the discussion is dead. From the feedback I get from the members of the Cybercrime Convention Committee, of the many hundreds of people I'm cooperating with from around the world, law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, they believe data retention, a certain level of data retention is necessary. And they are surprised that things that have been there for decades, like banks having to retain certain data about bank accounts in case it's needed for tax evasion, for fraud investigations. Nobody questions that. But when you talk about a minimum level of data retention, everybody's up in arms. So we have to ask also our questions there. However, the issue still is, under what rules would national security institutions have access to data retained? That is also something one would have to figure out. There are some issues there. There was
a question of cybercrime definition. Which
the question of that's the easy one, really. But you know, it's completely irrelevant, actually.
Yeah.
We don't need a definition, because what you need is, you need conduct defined in your domestic law as a criminal offense. And that counts, because only what is defined in your law as a criminal offense, only then can public authorities, under certain rules of procedures, do an investigation. If you look around the world, what is the common denominator defining cybercrime? You find them in Articles 2 to 10 of the Budapest Convention. The first 6 are offenses against computer data and systems, and another 3 or 4 are offenses committed by computer systems where the nature of the offense changes completely. There are certain elements of fraud, like normally the concept of fraud is you have to deceive the mind of a person. If you now deceive a computer, is that fraud? In Germany it was not, until they ratified the Budapest Convention. Now half of the cyber crimes recorded by the German Federal Criminal Police is exactly that. Article 8 Budapest Convention, in short, deceiving a computer, deceiving the mind of a computer, if that is possible. Okay, so there are certain offenses where everybody can agree. The nature changes, it's cybercrime. We have about 140 countries around the world that use the Budapest Convention for the domestic legislation, some fully, some less. But you can basically argue that cybercrime is what is in Article 2 to 10 of the Budapest Convention. But again, in practice, it only counts what is defined in your domestic law as a crime. That counts. The rest is esoterical debate. There was one more question. The journalism. You're absolutely right. The Council of Europe recently established a platform for the protection of journalists. Have a look at that. It's really interesting, and it documents every day if in one of the member states, the 47 member states, another threat against journalists, including whether laws are changed or specific threats against journalists are coming up. It's fully documented there. In that way, the threats become transparent. That's, I believe, is from the Council of Europe side a very useful and very helpful tool that we can make available, that we did make available. Thank you. As I said, it's easy.
Thank you. Almost as a tweet. Almost as a tweet. Tanya. Should we move on?
Yes, I think we shall move on because we already touched a bit protection of vulnerable targets, so maybe we'll give the word to Jeffrey, then Marco, sorry, then you're speaking the last. But you will have plenty of time at the follow-up after lunch break.
And we're probably breaking into smaller groups, maybe depending on the people, so we'll have even more chance to go deeply into Jeffrey.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon now, everybody. So my name's Jeffrey DeMarco. First, picking up on one of the first points Alexander made, and I couldn't agree more, the most simplest and basic definition of a criminal act or a crime is contravention of criminal law. So if you break the criminal law, you break the criminal law, and that is, based off, an entire kind of mosaic of complex geopolitical issues. So we'll leave it at that. When I first decided to come to this event, I thought maybe that I would be poorly suited for this panel. So my background is as a psychologist, working with online protection and crimes perpetrated against minors. However, at the moment, I'm project managing an initiative across Europe that's dealing with law enforcement and industry collaborative practices in dealing with multiple forms of threats. Now, we keep hearing this, and I almost like to call it a dirty word, and it's that multi-stakeholder word, which we all love to say, and we all love to use, and we all love to think about it in practice. So multi-stakeholder in terms of what we're discussing today. So we have internet users, technology users here, hopefully, I would imagine, the vast majority of us. We have politicians, we have the third sector, we have industry. Can I see a raise of hands for how many members of law enforcement are in here? How interesting is that? There's nobody from law enforcement in here whatsoever. It's slightly embarrassing, actually, if we consider that this is a European dialogue on internet governance, that we don't have one of the primary necessary stakeholders in the entire discussion when dealing with cybersecurity, cybercrime. Now, that's part of the reason why I think we're engaged in our project at the moment is it's exactly that. Touching on a little bit about what Marina said and what Alexander said as well, it's this issue of we need some standardization, we need some norms of practices, but that's kind of trying to pursue some form of mythological creature and a unicorn at some point. In terms of the criminal justice professionals as well, we can take a step back and look exactly at what is necessary for their training. Just like when I sat on the session yesterday on youth empowerment, and again, in which there were very few individuals in attendance, again, thinking that would be quite an important session that needed to be discussed. And one of the things that we discussed was obviously the issue of the digital literacy, digital divide, and this whole concept of having the digital immigrants training and teaching and educating and raising awareness with the digital natives. Well, I think we can expand some of those theoretical concepts to law enforcement and to prevention. And our law enforcement agencies need help. They need training. They are often not exactly ready and prepared for many of these cybercrime issues. I bring a case example into perspective here, working with one of the UK's top high-tech crime units, which again, functioning out of London, and one of their forensic investigative technicians talking to me and using the example of the protection of children online and the issue of child sexual exploitation material online. He told me, Jeffrey, back in the 80s, it was very interesting when we'd be engaged in an investigative process. We'd go in, we'd arrest somebody, we'd collect evidence, and we'd leave the site with these giant rubber containers, storage containers, with photographs and photographs and photographs of the explicit material of children. And he told me I'd have no idea how we're ever going to get through all of this. This is, almost 40 years ago now. I still work with the same man. I wasn't working with him in the 80s. And I see him now, and his team has not expanded. His team has no additional financial resources. He still takes the same 2 or 3 containers full of evidence, but guess what, guys? It's not pictures anymore. There's USBs with terabytes and terabytes of information that he just does not have the capacity to go through. So again, I don't want to focus on child exploitation material today because it's not what this panel is about. But I think my key issue here is it's a multi-stakeholder approach. We were all spewing that word out in every session that we're sitting on. But where's the agents? I mean, we do not have a key stakeholder involved here right now. That's pretty much all I have. Lots of what I already talked about, lots of what my colleagues have already spoken about pretty much touches in with everything I agree. I mean, we look back at, back to a definition of cybercrime very briefly. The definition, again, for a crime to be a crime, you have to have 2 basic concepts. You have to have mens rea and actus reus, a guilty mind and a guilty act. Does it matter if that guilty mind or guilty act is in person or online? I don't think so. Right? Again, but that comes down to, again, how a national entity constructs its criminal law. So I'll leave it at that for now. I think I will have a lot to say during the follow-up session if we have breakout groups in terms of the protection of young people, how we assist with bringing all the stakeholders to the discussion. But I think that it's vast importance, and I would urge you all to keep an eye out on our forthcoming research that is looking exactly at, we've just undertaken a police survey across multiple countries in the EU with over 2,000 different police officers across rank and file. So not just your high-tech crime experts. We're also looking at your common, as we say in the UK, Bobby on the beat, who is, going to likely be the officer who gets the phone call from a mother going, there's some man's penis on my daughter's phone. What am I going to do with that? Right? So again, not trying to focus on child sexual material, but an emphasis on, it's not just about the high-tech crime unit in the criminal justice process. It's about training our law enforcement agencies and improving and promoting these collaborative practices with industry, with the third sector, with the politicians.
Thank you very much. Sorry, one moment.
And I think we actually emphasize that we miss a very important stakeholder in this discussion. So I think that's a very,
absolutely
very important part.
And a bit of moderatorial. I believe that since we have a follow-up, we will give a floor to Dan and then go for lunch, and then all the questions you can ask after lunch, because there was delay before and we are delaying again. We promised we will not do more than 1 hour 15 minutes, but we are late. But you can have all the time you need. So
we are quite fine with time.
Put me in the unenviable position of being between us and lunch. Always a good spot to be as a speaker. But this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed that. And I wanted to jump in on comments on all sorts of things in here. But I want to come back to comments that were raised at the beginning and some of the lists of things that were here. And, the comments that we've heard today, what we come back to in so many ways is that ultimately this thing that we call the internet really is about people in some way. It's being held together by people, by organizations, by the collaboration, cooperation of those organizations. And if we look at where the organizations have come out of, where the internet come out of, and I should represent too. I work for the Internet Society, but really I'm here more representing sort of the technical community, the Internet Engineering Task Force, the people that are running and operating a lot of the parts of the internet that are out here. And when we talk about this, when we look at how the internet evolved, it's evolved out of collaboration and cooperation between groups and people, private, public, individuals, academic, all sorts of different organizations. And this opportunity that we've had, this internet of opportunity, what we've brought today, has really been, in large part, been enabled by trust, by people having trust in the system, trusting that they could go and order something, trusting that they can be able to communicate, in theory, in their own minds at least, securely, all of that. You know, people, the normal, everyday people who are out here, you know, want to just use the internet, feel safe in their use of it, and doing that. You know, and lately, of course, we've had a lot of challenges to that trust, right? Whether it's been the Snowden revelations, whether it's been the data breaches, just this big one this morning that was announced, that was 4 million names exposed through U.S. records that were over, you know, in the U.S. government. You know, these large data breaches, all this, you know, those decreased level of trust that people have in the internet, in the systems that are there. And I think that's really, to me, the fundamental challenge that we have in cybersecurity is how do we restore that level of trust and confidence? But the important, you know, the important thing is that we talk about this as a network of networks. And I think I want to put a number on that. Because if we talk about it's a network of networks, it's a network of networks. We say it, that's what we say all the time. Any guesses as to how large the routing table, all the routers that connect out there, how many different networks there are at a top level? Anybody want to give me a guess?
I think the 4 routers carry something like 300,000 routers, something like that. Roughly, 300,000.
Well, okay, it's not quite that. Well, the routing table might be that big, actually, but there's 50,000 what are called autonomous systems, large networks, okay, that are all interconnected at the top level. Well, not the top level, but the network of networks is there. It's at least, you know, those are the 50,000 big ones. But then each of those are like internet service providers who then connect out to hundreds of thousands, conceivably millions, of individual home networks, of individual, you know, this Wi-Fi network here, which in and of itself is a network of networks that happen inside of here. So the scope of the challenge that we have when we think about this thing called the internet is that it truly is a massive scale, you know, network of networks where we don't have these magic silver bullets that we can just say, you know, will solve this kind of problem. But more than that, you know, technology alone, you know, cannot solve cybersecurity issues. Governments alone cannot solve cybersecurity issues. Businesses alone cannot solve it. And it's important also to think that no one government can protect itself exclusively through its own actions. No company can protect itself exclusively by its own actions because we are all interconnected. Botnets don't discriminate. You know, they're not anywhere, you know, it goes around. It doesn't matter if you go and construct the most rigorous walls. Okay, somebody else can find a way in and connect through that. You've got to help ensure the overall hygiene of the whole network. I like the conversations we were talking about before about norms for the internet. And we're talking here about government norms, but there are also technical norms. One of the great work that's happened within the Internet Engineering Task Force, the ITF, is a development of a lot of best common practices, BCPs, best common practices, ways that people can go and work with this. We were talking earlier about best current operational practices, or some called BCOPs, that come out of the operator community. There's a lot of collaboration going on within the operator groups. The people who are actually running the internet get together at meetings. There's one just this past week in North America, NANOG, the North American Network Operator Group. RIPE, we've had conversations here. Marco was right here from the RIPE NCC that has their RIPE meetings where network operators get together and collaborate and work together in that regard. This is really that collaboration that goes on. Part of what's made the internet the success it is the general purpose nature that was mentioned out here before, that it's not optimized for anything specific. It can be any kind of network. This idea of permissionless innovation, that anybody can create any service. One of the strengths of the internet is that there are no gatekeepers. You know, any of us can publish information, we can set up our services. The next Facebook or Google, whatever, could come out of here in Bulgaria, or it could come out of Estonia,
Well, you've had a good number come out of Estonia, actually. You know, you've got all sorts of different things coming out of because there is no gatekeeper. So the challenge we have when we look at cybersecurity is how do we preserve that open nature that allows that opportunity and that innovation without adding additional gatekeepers in some way? How do we do it in those kind of ways? We, the Internet Society, took some time earlier this year to sort of document some of what the Internet technical community has been doing over these years in a process that we call collaborative security. And there's a link in the notes for this to a document that explains it more. But it's an approach to looking at Internet security issues. But it's both ways. I talk about it as far as something the technical community needs to be involved in or has been done there. And governments need to be more involved in that process, and the technical community needs to be more involved in the government process. There are two different worlds that exist and do a lot of their own things. I was delighted to hear you say, you know, certainly when you were under the DDoS attack, a lot of the technical community came to the aid and was working with that regard. In a lot of other cases, just as Jeffrey mentioned, the law enforcement isn't necessarily here. You know, I go to some of the meetings where I see the law enforcement and the techies aren't there. And I go to the technical meetings and the law enforcement aren't there. We do need to, you know, the only way that we will work through this and solve this big list of issues is by figuring out means to collaborate together. You know, the C-certs, the certs are excellent examples of that. We talked about, some of you who are interested in the, if you know of people in the network operating space, there's a project out there called MANNers, which is the Mutually Assured Norms for Routing Security. It's a project about basically minding your manners when it comes to internet routing. Simple things like not passing packets out of your network that have spoofed addresses coming that would be coming from somebody else's network. Okay, it's simple steps that operators can do, but they don't do them necessarily because it's not in their best. They don't have a reason to do it. But if they go and take those steps, helping the greater common, then you wind up with, you know, raising the overall hygiene of the whole internet. So there's a number of these steps that we can do to go and work with that. You know, you had asked us about some of the, you know, the issues that we've seen here. There's certainly some of these larger issues we talked about, you know, DDoS attacks, botnets, those kind of things. There's also a big question, I think, that we all have to look at, which is the deployment of these technologies. There's a lot of great security mechanisms already out there. And, you know, just as there's a lot of great security laws and rules out there, but the enforcement of those, the deployment of the technologies, you know, we're looking at these issues now in some places where people are saying, that's great, but, you know, I've got this computer, this home router that I bought at a local electronics store. The firmware's never been updated. You know, it's violently insecure. How do you go and get some of those updated? Some of that requires all of us to realize that we have a shared responsibility here and look at how do we go and secure our systems to the degree that we can, because we really are, you know, all in that. Other pieces, you know, if we talk about cybersecurity, there's a lot of new things looming too. We've heard here talk about Internet of Things and all of the incredible insecurity that is happening as a lot of those things get rushed through the process of people innovating, trying new things, but not necessarily thinking about security. Mm-hmm. So I'll end because I know we have lunch and we want to talk more about this later, but I think the key question really comes back to what Marina said earlier too. There's a lot of ideas, a lot of rules, a lot of laws. The question is, how do we implement those? And how do we do that in a way that brings together all of the people? Because it's not something that government can just say, here you go. It's not something that international government and entities can do. It's not something that businesses can do. It's not something that the techies can do alone. You know, none of these people can do it all alone, and we have to look at how do we collectively, you know, figure out how to make that work.
Thank you very much. And actually, I think that was an excellent wrap-up for what we are going to do at the follow-up session. Because after collecting all these issues, big or small, we have to see how we can actually collaborate, how to bring these pieces of the puzzle together. So I believe that we will lose one of the speakers after this panel, but we will still have a replacement for the ICANN speaker. So just come back to this audience, and believe me, we are going to discuss together, so you will have a floor as well.
So I think technically,
yes.
Danny, you wanted to add something?
I was just going to say, these postcards that are floating around are great examples too. because there's some great illustrations, but there's some on here like, cybersecurity, a holistic approach, collective responsibility. I could have perhaps shortened my talk and just held this one up a little bit and said, look at this. Okay, but actually we all kind of could have.
But still, we all say collective responsibility, we all say collaboration, we all say collective approach. But when it comes to the essence, what does it mean?
What does it
mean?
And
in which field, in which domain, it's a big issue.
And how do we do it?
Yes.
And how do we ensure we're all the right stakeholders are there at times?
And
to Jeffrey's point, where's the law enforcement?
It's a good experience that actually you see that there is a lot of cooperation on some levels. Well, on some levels we are negotiating how to cooperate.
We cannot leverage sometimes from one domain to another.
There was a lot of excitement about law enforcement not being here, and I just want to make this comment because it relates to what you said before. There was this intergovernmental expert group on cybercrime in the UN meeting the first time in 2011 in Vienna. And it was full of law enforcement, and they were listening to this talk happening there. And one of them came to me, but he spoke for many others. He said, "Look, I have no time for this," and so on. I have 400 forensic investigators to supervise at home, and there are 90,000 devices behind. And that's the reality. They're not here because they simply have no time.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll say we've experienced a similar thing. We've had folks looking at why aren't some of the network operators, who are actually running the actual internet, why aren't some of them in these places? And they have the same answer. They say, I'm flat out. I have no ability to go and attend a standards meeting. I have no ability to go to a network operators group because I'm just flat out trying to keep my network running. And we've got all these people and all those customers who are asking all those questions and all those tech support issues about why won't my iPhone work or whatever else. And so they're flat out with that. So it's the same question. How do we help some of those organizations that are so stretched? How do we help bring them into the conversation?
There are still some human limits, which is 24 hours per day, which is 8 pieces of information in memory and stuff.
Well,
so
and right, okay, let's take it all to us too. We want cheap bandwidth. We want fast bandwidth. Okay, we're going to go to whichever operator provides us with the best, fastest bandwidth, and it's usually at the lowest cost. Well, guess what? They're not going to have the large staff of people to necessarily provide. So you keep on going with that. It all comes back to some.
So yeah, thank you very much, and I believe that I don't have to ask you twice to give applause to our speakers. Thank you very much for being with us, participating here.